Digital Archaeology Atlas of the Holy Land aims to create a virtual atlas of tens of thousands of archaeological sites, artifacts, and other information dating from pre-biblical times to the early 20th century. It will use the power of spatial information systems such as GIS and Google Earth, whose visualization tools, combined with recent archaeological fieldwork and scrutiny of biblical texts, allowed researchers at the University of California, San Diego to reconstruct an ancient Egyptian pharaoh's military campaign in the southern Levant and its devastating and previously unknown impact on the largest Iron Age copper production center in the eastern Mediterranean region. Sacred texts are fundamental to the lives of billions of people around the world. Very little of biblical history as depicted in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible has been verified through the archaeological record. Yet it's precisely this opportunity that exists as archaeologists armed with new digital technologies try to establish synchronisms, references in a sacred text that parallel historical accounts as reflected in artifacts, inscriptions, and other parts of the archaeological record. Case in point, historical evidence of King Solomon is scarce. Excavations at Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer have uncovered structures that some archaeologists date to Solomon's reign. But that conclusion is not definitive because it is believed these sites were later destroyed by an invasionary force of Egyptian pharaoh Shishak I. The attacks are referred to in this account from the Bible about a military campaign against Solomon's son and immediate successor, King Rehoboam of Judah.
So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, and took away the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house. He took all.
Shishak is one of only two pharaohs mentioned by name in the Hebrew Bible. Founder of the 22nd dynasty, he ruled Egypt nearly 3,000 years ago. Most scholars believe the fifth year of Rehoboam's reign mentioned in the Bible would have been around 926 BCE, before the Common Era.
While scholars argue about the exact year and the precise routes that Shishak's forces took, they agree that the military campaign took place during the 10th century BCE, the most hotly debated period in biblical archaeology today.
The most detailed evidence of Shishak's attacks across Palestine is visible on the excavated ruins of the great temple of Amun at Karnak in the ancient city of Thebes, modern-day Luxor in Egypt. Here on an outer wall is a monument to Shishak and his victories. Depicting the pharaoh himself, the carved stones today feature roughly 80 name rings of towns and settlements of what appear to have been at one time as many as 180 rings. Most researchers now agree that this relief scene represents a topographical list, with each ring the name of a place subjugated by Shishak or his forces, commemorating his invasion of Palestine in the early 10th century BCE. The Palestinian topographical names still preserved in Karnak include a number of well-known current sites: Gaza, Gezer, Tirzah, Jezreel, and Megiddo in the north. As such, this facade is a treasure trove, helping archaeologists understand the impact of the Egyptian state on societies in the southern Levant nearly 1,000 years before Christianity and over 1,600 years before Islam was born. As part of their effort to develop a digital archaeology atlas of the Holy Land, researchers at UC San Diego's Center of Interdisciplinary Science for Art, Architecture, and Archaeology are using the latest archaeological data mining and visualization tools to postulate the direction and significance of Shishak's campaign based on the name rings at Karnak and the findings at excavated sites in Israel and Jordan with layers dating back to the biblical period. The story begins here in Tanis on the Nile Delta. This temple town was home to Shishak and successor pharaohs of Egypt's 22nd dynasty and remained so for roughly 200 years.
Archaeology is not an exact science.
In his blockbuster film Raiders of the Lost Ark, director Steven Spielberg has Indiana Jones in Tanis. Indeed, some scholars believe that after exacting tribute from Jerusalem, Shishak may have returned home to Tanis with riches from his military campaign in Palestine, perhaps even with the Ark of the Covenant. Fiction aside, it is considered likely that Shishak's army set out for Palestine from Tanis, heading east. As reconstructed by Egyptologist Kenneth Kitchen, the pharaoh probably led the advance along the Via Maris, the way of the sea, all the way to Gaza along the North Sinai coast, which is relatively rich in subsurface drinkable water. From Gaza, the next major town would be Gezer, one of the towns mentioned in the rings adorning Shishak's wall at Karnak. Gezer and Stratum 8 represent an important locale in the rolling hill region, or Shvela, bordering the coastal plain. Many researchers link this site to Solomon's building activities mentioned in the Bible, which also cites Shishak's successes in Judah.
And he took the fortified cities of Judah, and came as far as Jerusalem.
Following his successes in the Shvela and along the borderlands of Philistia, Shishak's forces marched through Ayalon Valley and reached the site of Gibeon, now the Palestinian village of El Jib. It is believed that he waited in Gibeon for King Rehoboam, residing in Jerusalem, to capitulate and give tribute. According to the Bible, Rehoboam and the princes of Judah gathered in Jerusalem to discuss how to respond to Shishak's threat of attack on the city.
And it came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, because they had transgressed against the Lord. And when the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Shemaiah, saying, They have humbled themselves, therefore I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out upon Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak.
In the end, Rehoboam appears to have capitulated, and Shishak's army was allowed to take what they wanted from Jerusalem without ever attacking. This may explain why Jerusalem is not mentioned on the victory wall in Karnak, at least among the name rings that are visible today.
Shishak's army continued northward, attacking Tirzah. Thanks to discoveries at an archaeological site called Tel El-Farah North, the biblical city is believed to be located 11 kilometers northeast of the modern-day Palestinian town of Nablus. Tirzah is mentioned in the Bible as the residence of Jeroboam I, ruler of the newly established kingdom of Israel. Jeroboam fled to the court of Shishak after a prophecy that he would rule 10 tribes after the death of King Solomon.
Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, and Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt, unto Shishak king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon.
If Jeroboam was his former protege, why did Shishak choose to attack Tirzah? Scholars debate why the pharaoh would have attacked both Jeroboam, king of Israel, and Rehoboam, the king of Judah and Solomon's designated successor. This remains a mystery to this day.
From Tirzah, Shishak's forces trekked further north, first to Jezreel, and then across the kingdom of Israel to one of its most important cities, Megiddo. The conquest of Megiddo was the centerpiece of Shishak's Palestinian campaign. Stratum 4B and 5A were partially destroyed by Shishak. The 6-chamber gate there seems to have continued in use, and Shishak erected a victory stele at the site, a portion of which was discovered by University of Chicago excavators in the 1930s. Artifacts include a type of royal masonry that began to appear in the 10th and continued into the 9th century BCE. Witness this beautiful example of an architectural flourish called a Proto-Aeolic capital. Shishak probably established Megiddo as his main headquarters for the campaign against Israel. But even as Shishak was conquering his way to Megiddo, secondary forces were forging to the south and east. At the beginning of the campaign, Shishak had established a base of operations in Gaza.
Before spearheading his main forces' advance north to Megiddo, the pharaoh had dispatched at least 3 large task forces, or as Professor Kitchen called them, flying columns, to the south of the country to subdue fortified sites in the Negev Desert and the Wadi Araba Rift Valley that separates modern Israel and Jordan.
Shishak's generals led the 3-pronged attack across the northern Negev. The archaeological record, including recent finds by a team from UC San Diego and Jordan's Department of Antiquities, provides major clues to the route taken by the forces along the middle prong of the Negev attack. The name of Shishak's general who led the advance has been lost to history, but discoveries indicate that the force swept across the northern Negev from the Gaza command eastward to the site of Sharuhen, one of the communities listed on the temple in Karnak. Here, the Egyptian forces established a small fort. From Sharuhen, the force followed the Wadi Gaza, making its way eastward to the fortress town of Beersheba. Stratum 5 at this ancient mound is believed to have been destroyed by the Egyptian forces. From Beersheba, the invaders appear to have traveled east 20 kilometers. Tel Aviv University archaeologists digging at the present-day Tel Malhata believe that this site may be the smaller site of Arad, part of a pair of settlements with this name mentioned on the Shishak list.
A separate name ring in Karnak refers to Great Arad, perhaps the most prominent Negev site on Shishak's monument. The site is believed to have been destroyed by the Egyptians, but scholars disagree on whether the actual site is stratum 12 or 11. The Shishak topographic list at Karnak has a section with 3 rows of name rings depicting places conquered in the Negev.
Not all can be identified today, but there is evidence that this force continued on from Arad to attack the fortress at Hatzeva, some 50 kilometers south of the Dead Sea in the Wadi Araba Valley. Hatzeva was probably a critical outpost because it permitted control of the overland Arabian trade route as well as the copper trade with the biblical Edom located across the valley. It is there, traveling east from Hatzeva, just 18 kilometers, that UC San Diego archaeologist and professor Tom Levy and Jordanian archaeologist Dr. Muhammad Najjar are excavating a site known as Hirbat en-Nahas. The name means ruins of copper in Arabic, and this site, rich in copper ore, is in Jordan's Fainan region, biblical Edom. The excavations have unearthed the largest Iron Age copper production center in the southern Levant. More than 24 acres in size, the site is covered in thousands of tons of black metallurgical slag.
To our surprise, high-precision radiocarbon dating at Hirbat en-Nahas show that copper metal production was carried out some 200 to 300 years earlier than scholars believed until recently.
This brings the occupation of the site into the orbit of the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, the time of David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, and Shishak. Recent finds of Egyptian artifacts at Hirbat en-Nahas lend credence to the excavators' new theory that the massive copper production center may have been a target of Shishak's army, given that Hirbat en-Nahas is just a day's journey from Hatzeva, one of the neighboring sites probably destroyed by Shishak. A word here about archaeology in the digital age. To ensure the most accurate data collection, UC San Diego archaeologists record all data in 3D with X, Y, and Z coordinates. Z is for elevation, collected with total stations and global positioning systems.
This enables researchers to control precisely the spatial location of architecture, artifacts, and other discoveries. We've created one of the first completely digital-based recording systems for archaeological research.
Digital photographs are taken of ancient buildings discovered in an excavation, for instance, and downloaded into the computer where they can be accurately drawn with a Geographic Information System, or GIS. Researchers can then reconstruct the site on their laptop computers in the field on a daily basis or back at home in California. The UCSD Center is using digital tools to analyze all sorts of data, from regional settlement patterns to small artifacts. The Pottery Informatics Project, for instance, is converting the Iron Age ceramic database of the Southern Levant into a 3D format. By doing this, pottery data could be queried in the Digital Archaeology Atlas of the Holy Land. The majority of ceramic publications in the Iron Age Southern Levant are published as two-dimensional drawings, losing key three-dimensional information on these vessels. By vectorizing published reports in ceramic databases, UCSD researchers are able to recover some of that 3D data. Once the vessels are vectorized, a unique mathematical algorithm can be extracted from the vessel so that it can be stored and classified by its three-dimensional shape and curvature. This information can then be exported to any 3D rendering program. The researchers have also begun to scan potsherds using a high-precision 3D structured light flex scan scanner, allowing each nuance of the objects to be recovered. Once the 3D scan of the object is retrieved, a mathematical computation can be run to determine the exact shape and stance of the vessel. The final result, either from 2D ceramic illustrations or 3D scans, is a digital 3D model that can be visually manipulated in 3 dimensions, analyzed, and compared with other vessels according to its mathematical curvature function. The resulting data can eventually be accessed through Google Earth-type tools. The new excavations at Khibat and Nahas are providing exciting new data for examining theories concerning the role of metal production on the rise of the biblical kingdom of Edom, as well as Shishak's campaign. Excavating a 6-meter-deep mound of ancient metallurgical debris in Area M at the site, that's over 20 feet deep, UCSD and Jordanian archaeologists for the first time have exposed a complete record of Iron Age metal production in the region.
During the course of our excavations in the Area M building, several Egyptian artifacts were discovered on the floor that may relate to Shishak's campaign or trade between Jordan and Egypt around that time.
These include a scarab originating from the eastern delta in Egypt, possibly from Tanis, where they may have been produced during the reign of Shishak and his predecessor in the early to mid-10th century BCE. Another important find, an Aegis amulet made of faience. Such amulets are primarily linked to the goddess Mut, and since there was a Mut temple in Pharaoh Shishak's capital city of Tanis, this amulet may also have originated from this region. These artifacts clearly place the building at Khibat and Nahas in the time frame and historical context of Shishak's 3-pronged attack across the Negev.
We excavated the large slag mound at Khibat and Nahas, presumably slag and other debris from the copper factory, and pinpointed the location of 22 radiocarbon samples. Those samples were then dated at the Oxford Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit by Doctors Tom Hyam and Christopher Bronk Ramsey.
The excavations in the slag mound revealed only 3 major strata through this massive accumulation of ancient metallurgical debris. By applying Bayesian statistics to the calibrated radiocarbon dates, it is possible to model the sequence of events in this part of the site. The highest probability for the earliest point in time when smelting may have been carried out at this earliest location, stratum 3, is put at 950 BCE. Stratum 3 itself spans between 5 and 135 years, with a highest probability associated with a briefer period of only 40 years.
In these early phases at the site, over 3 meters of metallurgical smelting debris may have been deposited in less than 50 years.
At the end of stratum 3, the slag mound was truncated and the 4-room building was constructed in stratum 2. This period dates from as early as 910 to as late as 800 BCE, with the highest probability that the end of the stratum 2 occupation in this area came in 840 BCE. In other words, the excavations at Khibat and Nahas show that there was a major disruption of the early 10th century BCE copper industry at the site between stratum 3 and stratum 2, around shortly before 910 BCE. This raises the tantalizing question, could this disruption be related to the military campaign of Shishak's troops that crossed the Negev desert into the Wadi Araba Valley? The force reached Hatzeva, and it was only a day's journey further east to the metal production center at Khibat and Nahas. The period of disruption in metal production appears to coincide with Shishak's reign from circa 945 to 924 BCE, and it is consistent with the 5th year of the reign of Judah's king Rehoboam, 926 BCE, when most scholars believe Shishak's military campaign in Palestine began. Prior to the excavations by UC San Diego and Jordanian archaeologists in the Feinan district, researchers assume that the Iron Age only began in this part of Jordan in the 6th or at the earliest 7th century BCE. This was based on the fact that most Iron Age excavations had taken place at sites on the highlands of Edom, sites such as Busera, assumed capital of biblical Edom, and no evidence of occupation in the 10th or 9th century BCE had been found there. As a result, it has been believed that activities mentioned in the Bible of David, Solomon, Hadad, son of the king of Edom, or even Pharaoh Shishak regarding the early Iron Age history of Edom might be pure myth.
Those assumptions ignored the important copper ore district of Feinan in the lowlands of Edom. Now, thanks to a mix of traditional and digital archaeology methods and high-precision radiocarbon dating, we can refute the earlier assumptions.
And by tracking the archaeological evidence of Shishak's military campaigns north to Megiddo and east to Hatzeva, and using it as a touchstone for analyzing the biblical citations about Shishak, a new understanding emerges about this period and the role Shishak may have played in the disruption or even devastation of the largest known Iron Age copper factory in the eastern Mediterranean. As such, the story of Shishak's campaign in Palestine underscores the need for more interdisciplinary science and technology-based research in the investigation of the relationship between the Bible and history, indeed between all sacred texts and the archaeological record.